Good afternoon, everybody. This is video 4 of the Personal Finance Investment Portfolio project videos. The first thing that I wanted to mention on this specific video dealing with savings accounts and certificates of deposit is the fact that if you reach this point, okay, if you're able to set some money aside, not just for the day-to-day purposes, but for your savings account, you're doing better than roughly half the country here. Recognize that 45% of the people surveyed here had zero money saved here, 45%. And another 24% had less than $1,000. So if you have more than $1,000 saved up, you are doing better than the vast majority of this country is. And I give you applause for that. Recognize, though, that this is just step one in ultimately reaching some of those investment goals that ultimately you have in order to kind of position yourself in such a way that you aren't scraping by paycheck to paycheck like you hear so many people suffering from. Recognize as well the purpose of savings accounts. Emergency funds, which fund things like these four things. We'll get more to that in just a moment. Okay, short-term investments, things like a refrigerator, a vacation that you're taking in another year and a half. Long-term, I would argue, are better served outside of savings accounts that we'll get more to shortly, but that's possible as well. Likewise for life events. If it's a college fund that you're funding that's due in another year or two, maybe a savings account or certificates of deposit is a good idea. But if it's much more than 2 years, I would argue that a savings account probably isn't the best vehicle for that, in large part because, again, a savings account you can get out very, very easily, which means that it's more liquid, okay? And it is also FDIC insured. And if you'll recall, the easier it is to get your money out right away and the more protected it is, the guarantee there means that your reward is relatively low as well. Okay, but again, if you even reach this point, you're doing better than most of America. Now, I want to discuss with you an emergency fund and the fact that savings accounts are used for those. Recognize here that most investment experts indicate that your emergency fund should be 3 to 6 months of your salary. I would argue when you're just getting started, folks, with your first part-time job, shoot for 3 months. But as soon as you get a few thousand saved, I would expand that to 6 months, as hard as that is, because you never know when things like you might lose your job, your car might break down. If you're young, you're likely not insured. You might not be on your parents' insurance plan. You might not be on your university's insurance plan anymore, and things come up. Finally, here, if you're able to buy your own home, okay, you're a little bit further off than that barely out of college student there. Things come up in your home. Trees lose branches that fall apart there. The roof might ultimately be a factor there as well if it's that large tree. A lot of different things can come up. Windows need replacement. Doors ultimately need refinishing or falling apart there. So what they're indicating here, and I think this is a pretty good rule of thumb, you want to save at least 10%, not in your savings account, but towards your retirement, and we'll get more to that shortly. But then 3 to 6 months of your salary specifically for your savings account or the certificate of deposit that we're going to be talking about here in just a moment. Now that we've reached the importance of savings accounts, it's important to, again, refer to websites like NerdWallet or Bankrate. Both of those are absolutely great websites. Recognize here that they provide an interest rate of 1.6%, okay? About last year, before the Federal Reserve started lowering interest rates, my online savings account was paying roughly 2.2%. Which wasn't too bad. It's gone down, though, because the Federal Reserve has brought down its interest rates. So recognize that interest rates are usually tied to the Federal Reserve's interest rates. Also note how much higher these banks' interest rates are relative to the sort of bank like Chase, where, again, you can walk in. Here, the interest rate that Chase is willing to offer you, okay, for ultimately keeping your money with them is 0.05%. Whereas this bank, Varo, I've never heard of this bank, but NerdWallet's saying, wow, they're offering you 1.61% for leaving your money with Varo. But again, Chase is the sort of bank that you can walk into the physical facility, whereas any one of these banks are all online. You cannot walk into this physical facility. And because of that, they're willing to offer you a bit more interest for that. They're saying, hey, thanks for leaving your money with us. We're willing to give you a bit more money or in return for saving your money with us. But these are savings accounts, which means that you can get out this money very, very easily. Typically, most people use these savings accounts to transfer their money from their savings into their checking. So they link those two, and that's something that you can do as well. It makes it really convenient to do that. I have an online savings account through Ally, and I have a checking account through Chase. Those two banks are linked. So if I want to dump some money from my checking account after I receive my paycheck, I can do that very easily into my Ally savings account. But if I determine I have to pay for a home repair or something like that, I can easily transfer that money out of Ally into that Chase checking. And a lot of banks are pretty integrated that way, making it very, very simple there. But like we learned with the checking accounts, it's extremely important to look at the fees associated with those savings accounts. So this is the Ally savings account. Recognize that every bank's going to have a different set of fees. I hope you've picked that up by now, which is why it's so important to compare the products that different banks offer. Even sometimes the fees might be different in a different savings account that the bank offers. Banks like Chase can offer a wide range of different savings accounts and fee structures. It's important to really take a look at each of those. But this is Ally's here. Recognize that here the overdraft item is $25, and they're only going to charge you once. Remember Chase's was $34, and they can charge you up to 3 times per day. Ally's is quite a bit less. A big reason why, again, Ally is purely an online bank relative to Chase, that it's brick and mortar. Ally is trying to get your business, so they have to be a little bit more competitive here. These factors might not relate to you as well with this outgoing wire transfer, these research fees, but the overdraft fee, yeah, that can be a factor there. Return deposit item, meaning if you deposit your check improperly there, maybe there's a problem with how much you deposited. You wrote down one thing, but it was actually less or more. They're going to charge you for those sorts of things. Anytime the bank has to take additional time to process the paperwork that you've turned in, they're going to make it worth their while. So you're going to want to make sure that you cross your T's and dot your I's there. Also recognize that they charge you things like excess withdrawal after 6 withdrawals in a month. What I'm wanting you to kind of notice about this is that banks are paying you to store your money with them, right? So as such, they're going to sometimes put limits on how often you take that money out of their bank and put it in another. Another big reason why is that, again, this is requiring more work of them on that. And if it's requiring more work, it's going to require more manpower that they ultimately have to pay these staff members to conduct this transfer. It isn't something that's just done by robots, at least not yet. So they charge you those fees if you withdraw more than that. Different banks have different withdrawal limits on them, and that's going to affect what kind of fees you might expect to pay here. Another common savings vehicle, though, is a certificate of deposit, okay, many times called CDs. Not the kind that you put in your radio. I imagine you already know that by now, but I just want to make that perfectly clear. So when I say CDs from here on out, recognize that I'm talking about certificates of deposit. What is different about a certificate of deposit relative to a savings account is that here you are waiting a specified period of time, okay? And at the end of that specified period of time, then you get your money out with that interest. Whereas with a savings account, typically you're paid that interest monthly. So each month you're paid that. You do not have access to the amount that you deposited or the interest that you get on that deposit on a CD until the term is up. So here you have a 1-year CD of 1.6%. What this means is that you will not get your deposit back and the 1.6% on that entire deposit until the end. So recognize as well, we're going to be referring to something called compound interest later. This is something that's called simple interest. So you're paid 1.6% on the total value at the end of that 1 year. Just like at the end of that 3-year term, you're provided 1.6% of that total there, right? So this is a key thing that I want you to think about relative to savings account, is that, again, I want to repeat this point. CDs, you are ultimately locking away your money for a specific period of time. And it isn't just a year. Sometimes it can be as low as 3 months all the way to 10, 20 years. You're getting different interest rates relative to that. Now, a key thing that you also want to keep in mind whenever you lock down your money is you better make sure, okay, ultimately, that if you lock it down for 2-3 years, you don't need that money for 2-3 years. because I imagine you've already determined that if they're paying you to keep that money for that specified period of time, they're going to charge you if you try to get that money out sooner. Also, note this. Remember, CD rates, savings account rates are tied very closely to how the Federal Reserve's interest rate is going, right? If the federal interest rate spikes, okay, right after you open the CD for 2 years and it goes up significantly, you'll learn that you could have gotten a far higher rate for your CD. That's why many times people use what's called CD laddering. What that means is that they might put, if they have $10,000, they might put $2,000 in a 1-year CD, okay, $2,000 in a 2-year CD, and so on. That way, as soon as that 1 year is up, they can put that into the longer term. Once that longer term is up, they can put that back into the shorter term, and vice versa there. The idea is that they're getting the best interest rate across those different levels there, and they ensure that they also have the money that they need when they need it. Folks, I hope you feel a little bit more informed about short-term investments. We've looked at checking accounts now, savings accounts, and certificates of deposit. The money market accounts that were mentioned a little bit earlier are frequently offered through brokerage firms, and typically a money market account is primarily used as a savings area for money that you're planning on investing in mutual funds of stocks or mutual funds of bonds. And typically they pay a rate similar to that of savings accounts, but it functions the same way. The money is very accessible. You can get it out very easily, and it is FDIC insured on that. Again, meaning that you're not going to get a real high rate of return on it, but the ease with which you can get it is pretty great there, as is the protection. Hope you found this informative. Thanks for your time and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye, everybody.